Fuck it, we'll do it live.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to Story Weavers, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything story related.
Here, we'll delve into inspiration, plot, structure, character, and dialogue. Be it in books, movies, music, comics, television, or anything else, we'll be covering it from conception to reception.
We'll be discussing between ourselves as well as with other creators and fans about their experiences, routines, and techniques. Join us and find your next inspiration. We're your hosts, Dean Bradley.
And John William Worth.
And this is Story Weavers. Hey guys, welcome back to Story Weavers, the podcast where we talk anything and everything stories. Today, we are here with Josh Pomponio again in this two-part interview. Josh is an independent filmmaker, photographer, movie buff, and just
Creative.
all-around stand-up guy. John and I have known him for a number of years now, and we're very happy to be able to talk to him on this podcast and get his perspective on the film industry and filmmaking and the creative side of filming. So today we're actually going to talk about one of Josh's creations. It is a short film called Analogic, which Josh wrote, directed, and starred in. Absolutely phenomenal film. And I'll go ahead and let Josh introduce it and himself, a little bit what it's about, and then we'll get into it. So Josh, welcome back. Thanks for coming on again.
Of course, thank you for having
All
me.
right, so tell us a little bit about Analogic. Give us a little overview behind what it is.
Sure, yeah. So Analogic is a short film that I wore multiple hats on. I wrote the script, I directed it, I appear in it, I also edited it. And it is a story about a young man who is in search of inspiration, in the form of relationships and women. And he's a photographer. He meets a woman in Paris, and he tells the story of their friendship through the photographs he has of her. And so as he's getting ready in like New York to open his like a gallery, he is showing, his friends, this picture of her, and he tells them, how they would meet. They kind of come up with this arrangement to not tell each other their names, and so that way they don't look at each other up on social media and learn everything about each other right away. They kind of take things slow. They spontaneously arrange their meetings, saying, "Oh, but tomorrow I'm going to be at this place. Wouldn't it be funny if you're there?" And they have this connection, and he, when he is back in New York, he is trying to recreate that spark of inspiration that he was missing, that he's missing from this person. And it's a very personal story. It's a lot of me in the character, and a lot of my I think my philosophy is in the movie. So it was a very personal film to make, something that was kind of years in the making. Uh, that finally kind of came to fruition in the fall of 2021 when we shot
Yeah.
it.
Well, let's just dive right in and talk about that. What made you decide to want to film this, or what events happened that allowed you the ability to to film a movie? And
hmm
also, why Paris?
I mean, why not Paris? I mean, I've fell in love with Paris the moment I landed there, 5 years ago. I
Yeah.
cannot get enough of that city.
Oh, it's so cool.
So
You got
the yeah
some great you have some great shots in it, but it never screams like, "Hey, this is
hmm
Paris." It's just,
Mm-hmm.
you happen
It's a
to be in the
character,
city of
but
Paris while you're in the movie.
hmm Yeah, that was definitely intentional, on my part, from having, gone to the city several times over the years. By the time we shot the movie there, I did that intentionally. Like, I didn't want to shoot things with the Eiffel Tower and the background every
Right.
shot. Paris is a city that people live in and feel things, and it's more, it's not really, it's not a tourist destination, and I really wanted to convey that in the film, and I think I'm glad it kind of defies expectations
Mm-hmm.
that way. It's very deliberate choice, but the inception for it, comes from it's a lot of different things. I guess the straightforward version is that in that summer of COVID, that summer
Mm-hmm.
of 2020, I was out of a job. I was, trying to figure out what to do with my time, and I have a really good friend who she is in the movie, Shimrit Eldis. She's an
Absolutely
actress. I met her here.
phenomenal, by the way. We'll talk more about her
I
later,
love
but
her.
oh my gosh, she was
Yeah,
incredible.
she's incredible. So I had met her here in New York almost 10 years ago now, but she lives in Tel Aviv at the moment, or for the last several years, where she's
Mm-hmm.
from. And but thanks to modern technology, we chat all the time, and stuff. And so we were talking just one day, and we were she was also out of a job. She was just waiting for the world to get back to normal, and we were thinking, like, oh, wouldn't it be great, when we can finally travel again? Well, we should like really do all these things that we're talking about doing. We should make a
Mm-hmm.
movie. And she's like, yeah, like we should make a movie in Paris. She loves Paris as much as I do, and it just came from this. I had nothing else to do. I just had this kind of dream of one day I can go to Paris with my friend and make a movie. And I started writing this script, and almost a year later, we did it. Things had kind of eased up a bit, and we had some funding, and
Yeah.
we just
That's
it was me and her and our
but it
friend
was
Kareem
it was a
and a
pretty
camera.
small project. Yeah, you had Kareem filming, but you only had one cameraman for the
Hmm.
whole film, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we had Kareem came with us to Paris to shoot those scenes, and then we had another cameraman, another uh,
DP.
mutual friend of ours,
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Gomez.
Oh, that's right.
He shot the 2
Forgot
days.
Gomez
Yeah,
did that for you too. Yeah.
yeah. He shot the 2 days we were in Hoboken in the studio, and
Cool.
so yeah, very very intimate project. Just a handful of people involved. Yeah.
Hmm. So the original idea for Analogic, this is just what did you first come up with it while you were discussing with Shimrit and during 2020, during the year of COVID, or was it an idea bouncing around in your head beforehand, like what I would like to make a film about this
Hmm.
topic, this subject, about two people meeting in an analog way, hence the name Analogic.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Well, I was taking some inspiration from a film I did in college, which had a similar plot of it was about a woman photographer who her friend sees in all her photos in the background, like the guy wearing like a red leather jacket.
Oh, I like that.
And turns out all the places that she was photographing were like her favorite spots or something, and then she meets the guy. But that was kind of the genesis of like, oh, you have a person telling a story through photos. And when I was working in New York with you guys, and I was kind of getting exposed more to like the world and traveling and meeting other people. I love that idea of the photographs telling a story,
Mm-hmm.
and I kept that in my head as I was doing other projects. I was like, how can I kind of repurpose that for something different? And I kind of simple, a story of, boy meets girl, boy loses girl. And I thought, being a photographer myself, being a filmmaker, that would be a good use of this kind of structure, and changing it a bit, with that, knowing the person before you take the photos. The idea of like kind of remaining nameless. It came from one of my favorite movies of Last Tango in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
Bernardo
Brando and Maria
Bertolucci.
Schreider, they say like, oh, they don't want to know anything about each other outside of the bedroom, outside of the apartment. And in the 70s, that's feasible because you don't have the internet, you don't have social media, you can't find someone at the click of your fingers. And as I was kind of writing, kind of thinking of that, and writing like kind of like an not like an updated version, obviously, but
How do
like
you bring
I
this
was
into
thinking
the
like
21st
how,
century?
yeah, how do you bring this in the 21st century? And it's like, what if you just have, that, and that comes
Two
out in the
characters who
dialogue. They just
agree to do
decide,
that.
Mm-hmm.
2 characters who agree to that, they
Right.
yeah.
Which is refreshing because I mean, I'm making the connection in my head to like a horror film, but it's like, how in the modern era, it's like you've got cell phones and all this stuff. So it's not as easy to be stuck in a
Mhm.
situation like that. This is a lot like it. And it was kind of, I remember watching the film, and when the two characters just kind of agree to, oh, we're not going to look each other up. We're not going to tell each other our names. We just want to enjoy the moment and be people. The honesty and the directness was just refreshing, especially for
Definitely.
people, I would say, like of our age,
Who
who
grew up
perhaps kind of
without that?
grew up without that, and in some ways maybe
Mhm.
want to go back to that,
Mm-hmm.
or miss that kind of feeling of just spontaneity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm,
Yeah, and I definitely think that is something that affects, our generation, because we're a very transitional generation, having, been young enough to remember before the internet, and also growing up while the internet itself is growing up and kind of becoming a bigger and
maturing
bigger
with us.
presence in our lives. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, subconsciously or maybe even consciously, we people of our generation, we try to, I don't think it's a type of nostalgia, but we kind of want to bring some of that innocence back
Oh yeah.
into our lives.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Yeah.
this, innocent kind of way of looking back at this pre-internet time,
There's a
and I think
grandeur
we
in mystery.
mhm.
There is. And then the other thing, playing into like the nostalgia aspect, it's like bringing that little piece of your childhood or the days you miss, bringing it
Mhm.
into the modern day, and in a way just seeing how it interacts with you at this more mature age. Seeing what's different and what
Mhm.
what changed.
So I remember reading about Renoir, and he's, I don't know if he's my second compared to Wells, or if they're, what I think they're both tied for being my favorite filmmaker, Jean Renoir, the French filmmaker, son of the painter.
Mhm.
He was born in 1894, and so he was only kind of a child in the 1800s and the 19th century for only a few years, but for the rest of his life, he always considered himself a man of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
He looked back on that period, from having lived it as a little bit as a child, but then also reading literature written at the time by, like, his father's friends.
Right.
His father was friends with, um, not, Emile Zola, so, he
Mm-hmm.
knew all those guys, kind of directly or indirectly, and as he grew up, and he kind of matured, he read things from his childhood, and that affected him, in the 20th century, but still feeling like a man in the 19th century. And I feel like that about myself in a way, and
With regard
how
to
I
the
approach
90s.
my filmmaking.
Mhm.
Yeah, like, I am a child of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
I was only there for 10 years, but that last decade of that century, I think, was so very different than the next, 20 years that have
Oh
come,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
2000s, 2010s. It's such a different way of it was such a different time that I feel like I'm, even though I've lived more in the 21st century and have grown up more here, I feel like I'm still a man of the 20th century. I still feel, this kind of, pre-internet kind of
Mm-hmm.
way of
I think
thinking.
a lot of our
I don't really
generation
need.
feels that way.
Mhm.
Definitely. Yes.
And I think that's, probably that's subconsciously in Analogic. Is this way, I play the character of Vince, who's, searching for inspiration, and meets the muse in Paris. And I feel like that's the theme that comes from, the 90s, this idea of looking for a connection, looking for someone who inspires you, and not being able to find them right away,
Mm-hmm.
not being able to have that instant gratification
Mhm.
of, oh, did my meme get 3 likes or 4 likes, or like
Right.
something, did my
Before any of
crush,
that
view
mattered.
my story? Yeah. And I think that's a very different, that's a very different, that's a very unique thing. I think, we'll be the last generation to have.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see though. I mean, that is true, but I mean, what comes in the next 20 years? I think what some people fail to remember is like the iPad or gen- people have owning tablets. The general public, it's only been around
Hmm.
13 years. And so much
Maybe.
has changed since then. So it'll be interesting to see what how future generations feel that same sort of
Hmm.
nostalgia. Um
Mhm.
But
It'll be interesting to see.
Go ahead.
I was to kind of end our tangent here.
Mhm.
I was gonna say it'll be interesting to see what in 20 or 30 years, what young people now who will be adults then, what will they be nostalgic about from now? Like
Right.
what is nostalgic about our era now?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's gonna be
It'll be
interesting to
interesting to
see.
see, yeah.
It's always I like, sorry if I'm
No, go ahead.
continuing but
You're
it's
good.
like one of the things I like looking at is seeing how as we age we react to different things, and kind of like seeing how those who come after us, they start following, seeing how they change and how they largely stay the same. Like how you said, in 20 years, are they going to be feeling the exact same things like we are now, and that they're sometimes criticizing us, like the overabundance of
Yeah.
nostalgia, the
Except
need
it'll
to
be
always
about
be
like
going back.
TikTok, not Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like, or Vine was our TikTok,
Mhm.
but now
But even
TikTokers look back on Vine and they're like, "What's
we
that?"
were still like 20. We were in our late teens, early
It happened
20s
so
by the
fast.
time Vine was a thing, and that was a thing for what, a year?
Right, because it's like like Josh, how you were talking about Renoir. It's like he was born in, you said 1894,
Mhm.
correct? And it's like, in a way, he almost aged with movie making. That was like the first thing I thought of, was like, gee, filmmaking kind of
Mhm.
came around in the early 20th century, and so it kind of grew up with him to an extent. But I feel like now technology is moving at a much faster rate, almost faster than we are meant to kind of experience it
Yeah.
to some way. So it's
Keep
like the
up
human
with.
the human experience is changing. So maybe that's why we keep yearning to go back to something simpler.
Mhm.
It's like, I don't need every iDevice screaming at me when someone calls me, because it's like my computer, my watch, my phone, my iPad, everything. I don't need that.
Mhm.
It's like, just go back to meeting someone in a park clandestinely. It's like, oh, I'll be here around this time of day. If you're there, it'd be cool.
Yeah.
So
yeah, to pull the rope back
Come
a little
back.
bit, as wonderful as that tangent
Yes.
was, and I think we could
Yes.
probably all talk about it for an hour.
Oh yes.
All right, we'd like to take a brief moment to remind you of our book of the month for December 2023. This month, we're reading Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. Written in 1939, this is a fictional account of a soldier's experience in the aftermath of World War I and his experience on the battlefield in Europe. So I have started reading this book. I'm not terribly far into it. I'm only on page 40, so just a couple chapters in. But so far, it is quite eye-opening. It's definitely a little disturbing, and John, from what you've told me, it's probably going to get more disturbing and much heavier than where I am.
Oh yes.
So far.
Oh yeah. This roller coaster keeps going downhill at a faster rate. Don't worry.
So, not that this book is funny in any manner. It's a very serious, heavy topic about the injuries sustained by a man in wartime. Yeah, we invite you all to read along with us. It is significantly shorter than The Splendid and the Vile was last month, so hopefully it won't take you quite as long to get through it. I actually am hoping to maybe do a second read of it before we get to the recording of the episode, because I think there's going to be a lot of meat in there and there's going to be a lot to process. And I want to be on top of my game because John read this book 20 years ago, and so...
Oh, don't
I've got to catch up.
like that. Don't age me. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing what you think of it. Like, it changed me. It changed the woman who, at the time girl, now woman, who recommended it to me, and I want to see how it affects you.
Yeah. So join along with us, read it with us, or check out a summary on Wikipedia, however you want to do it. If you just want to listen to the episode when it comes out to make a decision on whether to read it, that's your call too. We enjoy reading, and we would invite you all to read these books with us. Now back to the episode. But so when you did go to Paris to film, did you have specific places in mind where you wanted to shoot things, or was it more kind of like, hey, let's walk around this area and find a good place to shoot depending on how crowded it was or how loud it was or weather or whatever?
There was a few places that I had in mind for just for shooting like kind of any scene there, and it was, I think, only two specific places where I wanted specific scenes to be shot. One was
Let me guess.
their
Was one of them a
walk.
cafe? Was one of them
Yeah,
a specific
no,
cafe?
I mean, no,
No,
not a
okay. I was
specific
just
cafe.
guessing. I was trying to take a gander.
It was at the along the Seine. You know, I wanted to
Okay, yeah.
have like kind of their peak emotional
The
moment to
sunset
be
scene.
on at the
With their
sunset, you know,
legs hanging over
talking
the
on the
water.
Seine.
Yeah.
The legs hanging, because that's a very Parisian thing to do. You know, people are just, you know, there drinking wine and eating
Mhm.
baguettes and stuff. And I knew I wanted that scene to be there, and I knew I wanted the ending to be at the that
On the
bridge,
bridge. Yeah.
the Point de Burhacum or something. Never remember the name of it, but it's that iconic bridge. You know, Inception had a scene there. The Last Tango in Paris begins on that bridge, and so I wanted to end my movie there as a homage there.
Cool.
And the other place I wanted to shoot a specific scene was, you know, the where my character first meets the muse. I wanted to shoot it in the gardens of Luxembourg in the afternoon, because that place has amazing lighting. That's
Yeah.
the best place for light in the
See,
afternoon.
that's one of those things
And
I
even
never think of because I'm not a filmmaker. I never would like
mhm,
consider time of day or lighting for a scene, which probably
Oh, the
seems
golden
very
hour.
like obvious and intuitive to you. But yeah.
Hmm.
yeah, well, I wanted to shoot there, and it's funny too, because you know, when you make a movie, whether it's a big movie or a small movie, you don't shoot things in order.
Mhm.
So the on the very last day we were there, this Friday afternoon, we were shooting the first scene where our characters talk, mine and Shim's character, and she goes, "Oh, did you take a picture? Can I see?" They're having the walk, and I wanted to shoot it in this garden with this incredible afternoon lighting, and the whole week we were in Paris, we didn't have any trouble with like people coming up to us or getting stopped by police. You know, like
Mhm.
everyone, it's Paris is like New York in that way. Everyone has a camera, everyone's doing something.
Everyone just
It's
kind of
not
ignores
abnormal to
you.
see. Yeah. And so, you know, we're shooting this last scene, and, you know, it's gonna be this last hour, we're gonna be making this movie, and we're blocking it, we're kind of rehearsing and recording a few times, we can't quite get the timing right. And of course I want to be cool and like Orson Welles and do everything in one long shot while
Mhm.
we're walking together. And we're in the middle of filming it, and I could tell we were just getting things right when two security guys stop us, because apparently you can't show a government building in Paris in a video or in a film or something.
Mhm.
And so they politely asked us to not do it, but they were kind of like trying to tell us what to say to them to allow us to keep shooting there. They're like, oh, like if it's for like social media or for like a student project, you know, that's fine, but if it's like a real couple, we couldn't quite, we kind of picked up on it, but we weren't quite sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you know, we're like, oh, but it's like a film and
You
blah
want
blah
to
blah.
get
And it's
back
like,
to
okay,
the
well then you
US
gotta go and
tomorrow?
stuff. And yeah, right. And but they were, you know, they were really polite about it. So then we walked a couple blocks over behind the Pantheon, and we ended up shooting in this alleyway, which
Mhm.
is on the corner of the steps where Owen Wilson meets the taxi to the 1920s from
Midnight in
Midnight in
Paris.
Paris.
Oh,
So
okay.
you know, that's another Paris movie homage and Analogic is that. I don't think you can quite. I think in the beginning of the shot, because again, the shot is still all one long kind of take as we're walking down the alleyway. And I think in the very beginning of the shot on the corner, you can just barely see the steps because of the way the architect,
Mhm.
you know, you could just kind of barely see the steps that he
Hmm.
sits on and stuff. And you know,
Yeah, but I like, at least when I was watching that, I liked that scene because there was nothing super flashy about it. It's like as cool as some of the landmarks in
hmm
Paris would be. It's like, oh, you literally ran into each other in an alleyway, like just where people are just casually
hmm
walking. Um, I wanted to ask about the script because, as we discussed in the last episode, Orson Welles is your favorite filmmaker, an idol of yours. Um, when you wrote the script, so this is a two-parter. One, were you always
hmm
considering yourself as the lead actor or the lead performance? And two, I remember we discussed a little bit. Shimrit had some input into her character and some of the scenes. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit and explain the writing process, the storytelling process,
hmm
and how much improv maybe happened?
Sure. I think no matter what I'm writing, whether it's going to be something I'll shoot soon or just, you know, something I'm writing for the future or just for fun, I'm always imagining myself as the central character. Just there, I think I have that kind of thing that Wells had, that, when you're creating something, it's you that it's
Piece of
creating.
yourself.
I have to be
Mhm.
in. I'm putting something of myself on the page, whether it's, about emotions or love or hate or something. It's something that's coming from inside of me. So the way that I can relate to what's going on in the story is if I am there.
Mhm.
And I think Analogic is, a bit more personal, because the character, even though, I'm not really playing myself, I don't think, but like I still think that it's a very very close to who I am and how I think, and my
And your
worldview,
reactions
and
and
and my reactions. I don't think that I don't think I would have been as enthusiastic to make the movie if I was gonna have
Someone
someone
else.
else playing that
Mhm.
part. Yeah. And it's not like an ego thing. I don't think it's not like, oh, I need people to see that it's me in front of the screen and directing. It's not something that's like, look at me, look what I can do. It's more of like,
Just
I
because
need
it's
to do
it's
this. Like
it's
I just need
personal
It
to,
and this
felt
is
right.
yeah,
yeah.
this is yeah.
I need to be in that part.
Mhm.
And as far as, other people's, Shim's contribution, she was with me, from the beginning. I wrote the movie, work with her. I think I write everything to work with her. If I could cast her in all my movies,
Mhm.
I'd be in
Mhm.
heaven. Um, and yeah, I mean, some of the things, I think she suggested certain lines of dialogue. She suggested different changes. There's one part in the script where she's talking about how, like, her characters, she's like the youngest of the three, but both her older siblings have husbands and are married and have kids and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and she's traveling the world. That's her.
Mhm.
That's she didn't write that line of dialogue, but I know her well enough that, like, I know that's how she feels. Maybe, I mean, maybe she said that to me in person one time, and I just remembered it for the script or something.
Right.
Mhm.
But that's really her, and she embraced it, and she, suggested different things. I think the one, her big monologue on the river, which I think it ended up kind of part of on the cutting room floor. I think in the script, it was a bit longer, and then she suggested certain changes to cut it down more, and then we cut it down later. So, and film, even though I'm a one man band as the editor and the producer and the writer and the director and the actor. It's still I still felt Analogic was a very collaborative film.
Mhm.
Kareem made
Mhm.
suggestions that I hadn't thought of. Steven and Hoboken made, everyone.
Contributed.
It's a collaborative
Yeah.
Oh
effort.
yes.
Everyone contributed something that I think made it the film that we watch today. I think.
Mhm. I mean,
You
it's
know.
a testament the fact that for a lot of the film, I remember asking you this before as well. A lot of like the street scenes and you and Shim kind of like walking around and like seeing the band playing and like all the crowd scenes.
Hmm.
I mean, it's shocking how much of the film wasn't that spontaneous, even though it felt super organic. And
Hmm.
then one thing I also wanted to ask, because Kareem was the DP, and as we just found out, Steven was also a photographer on the film. Did you always have your mind set on them to do the cinematography, or how did you
Or did the
choose them?
stars
Or
just align properly?
exactly.
I think it was kind of both. I owe Kareem a lot, because he got me the job where we all met.
Okay.
That my
Oh,
first
I
out of
didn't know
college
that.
job,
Yes.
and
Oh,
Nice.
yeah, because, well, I went to college with Kareem too. We both went
okay.
Oh,
to William
okay.
Patterson. We
Okay.
had a lot of, yeah. So we
So
go
you guys
we
have
go
a
way
history. I
back,
Okay.
didn't know that.
actually. Yeah. And I felt like, working in New York City for as long as I did, that really, I had a really profound effect on the course of my life. At 24 years old, and it really opened it really affected me profoundly. That experience, and I felt I owed it to him, uh, and I want to say thank you also. I felt like one of the reasons why I was eventually having this opportunity to make the movie was in some way due to, the job I got through him.
Mhm.
And, he was in a similar position that I think we all were at that time of, kind of changing careers, and
Mhm.
wanting to do what you really want to do. And I felt like, hey, and he's a really good, creative. He's directed his own films. He's done
Mhm.
photography. And I thought, like, this could be I trust him. I think that's another thing that it comes down to when it's selecting any collaborator, whether it's
Very much
an
Mhm.
so.
actor
Very
or a
much.
cameraman or editor, is that you have to trust the person. And I trusted Kareem to to come to Paris and shoot this film. And and not to diminish Steven's contribution, but I had wanted to keep working with Kareem when we shot the New York scenes, but or I said the scenes at the studio in Hoboken. But we had to shoot by a certain date, and Kareem wasn't available. And
Right.
Steven's also someone who I knew, who I trusted, who could be there, and I said, hey, and he did not hesitate to come and shoot for the couple of days we shot together. And his contributions are just as valuable as Kareem's in
Yeah.
Paris. They
Big
both.
shout out to Gomez. I love that dude.
Mhm.
Yeah,
he got me through a lot of
cool.
days at work there.
Moral support.
Yeah, too.
Yeah.
And then this is just another random question that I just thought of when you mentioned like the filming at the steps. Were there any deleted scenes that you really said like, oh, I really want to keep that in there? Since you're also the editor, like, was there anything that was really...
No, I mean, yes and no. I mean, the film changed so much while I was editing it. I originally intended it was supposed to be a feature,
Oh,
but then we didn't shoot
Interesting.
quite enough material to cover a full
Right.
90 minutes. So I think like the very first like rough cut was like 45 minutes,
Which is
wow.
it's kind of an
between...
awkward length for a film.
very.
Yeah. And then I eventually cut it to like I think a half an hour, and then like it kept decreasing by like 5-minute intervals from like
Yeah.
30 minutes to 25 to 20 to I think the last version that we screened at a festival was 15 minutes. And so I mean it's a strange question, because it's like, yeah, like I wish I could have incorporated like everything that we shot in it, but not everything works,
Right.
or at least I'm not competent enough to make it work as an editor.
Right.
Maybe I should have got someone else to edit. I'm not sure, but I I don't know. I would love to, if I could do it. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate at the opportunity to do it again as a feature, because there's definitely scenes that were written that we didn't shoot. There was a couple things. The dynamic with my character and Selma's character and the Hoboken stuff, I think, is stronger in the script. And for whatever reason, I don't know if we didn't shoot scenes or if scenes didn't come across. Just I think there's another film to be made there from the script if I was to have a budget or something. But as far as deleted scenes, I don't know. I mean, I think in the latest scene, in the latest version, I cut out the Gajo singing guy on the steps, because it just felt weird,
Like
and
a
I cut it out.
punctuation in the middle of the sentence. Almost.
It was like this weird music video that comes up. But it was one of those things where we talked about this in our Wallace episode about happy accidents. Like I remember when that happened. We had just finished filming that scene of walking down that street in Montmartre, and this guy comes up to us and goes, "Oh, are you making a movie? What, can I be in it? Can you film me?" And it's just like he starts singing the song, and we shot this thing, we improvised, we accepted it. And I remember thinking, man, this is what Wells talked about. This is one of those happy accidents.
This the busking scene.
Yeah.
That's like that's
the
one of
guy
my
with the
favorite scenes.
guitar.
That's one of my favorite scenes
Yeah.
in the whole film.
It's on the cutting room floor now, unfortunately. But
you're killing
See,
me. And I apologize that it's one of my favorite scenes, and it was improv and not in the original script, and wasn't anything that you came up with.
But it's like
dude,
staying in character, staying in that
it was
vibe.
So
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Another happy accident that happened was in the very last scene when my character meets the new muse,
Right.
Federica.
Yeah.
There's a part where I bump into her, and originally just like, oh, we bump into each other and that's kind of it. But we did the one shot where I hit her, and the lens hood of the on the camera fell off. It wasn't planned. It
Right.
just happened to hit her the wrong way, and it fell off and hit the ground. And we're kind of laughing, and we're rolling, and I'm thinking, oh my God, Fernanda, don't stop the dialogue. I kept going with my thing,
Right.
but she's not a trained actress, so she just kind of thought like, oh, we should stop. I was like, no, keep going. And then we had a good laugh, and then we still used that take. We quickly improvised like a close up of the lens cap hitting the thing on the floor and stuff, and then we cut back to another take where we continued the scene. And that was actually the very first scene that we shot, because Fernanda was only with us for I think 2 days at the beginning of the week before she did her own kind of Euro trip. So we had to shoot her scenes,
Right.
and of course I have a beard in that scene, so I grew the beard out, and then I shaved it, to show the passage of time.
I didn't even pick
But yeah,
up on
that was the very first. that was the very first scene that we shot. We had that happy accident right away, and I think that's when I kind of knew. Well, that's when I
The
felt like,
stars were
okay, I'm a
aligning. Like
filmmaker now.
this,
Like I
this is
yeah,
the
I
thing I
like I
need
had
to
my
something
do.
good
first
is
happy
happening.
accident. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to like comment on something you said about like being the editor and like how you said you should have got another editor. I do have to commend you for the editing too, especially if you cut the film down from like a 45-minute down to what it is to
Mm-hmm.
now, because it takes a lot of willpower to cut out what you might think of as like a very priceless and a perfect scene, and being able to say, no, this doesn't contribute to the soul of the story. Because
Mm-hmm.
I could say, as a writer myself, there are times where it's like there will be like pages of something that I've written and I was like, oh
And
my
you're
god,
very proud of.
I bled on the page. This is perfect, but it doesn't contribute. And like what you said strikes it right on the head. You were like, there's a whole movie told in the last like 2 minutes of Analogic. And that's like,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's what I would aim for. Is it's like in this one little scene, there's so much more that you could go on it, because that's the audience's job. And yes, you might be able to revisit Analogic as a feature in the future, but it's like you're making the audience think like, ooh, what else is going on here? Where else could this go? You're
Mm-hmm.
leaving them with that thinking that sticks in their mind. I just wanted to say that after hearing that little thing about the
Mm-hmm.
editing.
Yeah, and it wasn't as hard as I thought, because when I did the kind of the final cut of the film,
Mhm.
it was about a year, over a year after I had first kind of done it, and I was kind of frustrated. I felt like it should have had more success. I wanted more people to see it. I wanted to be in more festivals, but it wasn't anything about like, oh, I need people to see me. I felt like I owed it to everyone that was involved in the project. I felt I
To
owed it to Shim and
right.
Kareem and Steven,
Mhm.
and to make it as good of a film as I know. I mean, it's all there,
Yeah.
and I felt like, so when I did this kind of final edit, I did it in a really cold manner. I felt like no obligation to anything that I had done before, and I really
A
just
total
cut,
different
cut, cut, cut.
mindset.
Oh, like I really like this
Ruthless.
thing, but like it's not gonna work. So cut, cut, cut,
Hmm.
cut, and I cut it, and I mean, I didn't just make it shorter. I also kind of changed some of the structure. I changed some of the ways that the scenes played out by cutting it, and it ended up being my favorite version of the film. And I remember also feeling kind of frustrated at the end of it, because it's like, man, why hadn't I done this like 6 months ago or a year ago? Why couldn't I have done this sooner?
Because we're
And
humans,
then
and
that
there's
I was frustrated with
there's a
myself.
learning
Yeah.
process to creativity. I was gonna compare it
Hmm.
to writing music, or being in a
Mhm.
band or working with a producer, especially when you're writing something that's um, somewhat collaborative. I was in a band for years, and it was, there were two main guys. Like, it was their project. They started it. They were writing it. Um, and sometimes you want to make contributions and have ideas, and you think, because of your own tastes and your own experiences, like, oh, like, this is what it needs, this is the best thing.
Hmm.
But they come back, oh no, you don't want to do that. And you read
Mhm.
you read articles and interviews with bands all the time that'll say, oh, well, this album came out this way because of the producer, and the producer told us to do this thing. It's just interesting dichotomy between like the music creation and the filmmaking, and the fact that you did a lot of that without the external influence of someone, and you were
Mhm.
not only able to make those decisions, and then you were able to be okay with those decisions.
Hmm.
That's
Mhm.
hard as a creative, I think.
To have that objectivity, I
Yeah.
call it.
Right,
That.
yeah. To be
Mhm.
able to
Hmm.
to criticize your own work and understand that it's maybe your idea isn't the best idea for it.
Hmm.
Yeah, that can be hard.
I hope on whatever I decide to do next, the next project I'm working on, I'll remember that lesson sooner, early on, and say like, okay, like I'll be a little bit more fast with that,
Yeah,
and
just
and
Mhm.
but it's also like, there's definitely the risk of overdoing it to the point where you've
hmm.
taken yourself and the emotion out of it completely, and now maybe it comes off that you're telling something that's, you know, much more gray or neutral, that doesn't have an
Cold
opinion.
and distant.
Yeah,
Yep.
Hmm.
because I mean, John and I talk about this a lot, but whenever you're creating art in whatever form it is, like, you have to have an opinion. You can't, you know, be squeamish about it, and worry about what other people are going to think. Like, if that's what you want, like, you have to have an opinion and you have to go for it, and people will appreciate it or they won't, but you have to be okay with the decisions you made, in the creation
Mhm.
process.
And I think that's also it's a tough thing for a creator to watch their own work after it's done or in the middle of watching or even watching just other films, because I know what goes on behind the scene. I'm always seeing. I think Wells used to call it like the ghost of the guy with the clapboard before every shot. Like looking at something. Looking at any shot. Whether it's like a second long or 5 seconds or 2 minutes. I'm looking at it thinking, okay, where do they put the lights? What lens are they using? What's the distance? What is the? I'm looking at all these different things, and when I'm watching any movie like on TV or any TV show, and then when I'm watching like my own project, my own work, I'm seeing, not only am I seeing like the ghost of the clapboard, but I'm also saying, oh, okay, well, I should have done that. I should have done this differently. I'm
Yeah.
seeing all the things that
Hmm.
I know now I could have done differently.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But at the time, I didn't know him. I didn't know any better. So it's like, it's nothing I can criticize myself for, but it's
But that's
frustrating.
that's the cool
It's a frustrating
That's
thing,
the
you
cool
know.
thing about art, though, is especially if you have an artist or a creator that has a relatively long history of their creations that are available, to watch or to read or whatever it is, and seeing, those changes over time. As a music guy, I've always been one, like, when it comes to bands and albums, my favorite albums by most bands are oftentimes the ones that are like critically despised because the band took a chance and went in a totally different direction
Mhm.
Hmm.
than what
Hmm.
their fan base is, accustomed to. But to me, like, that's what's exciting to me is they've gotten out of their comfort zone and they said, let's try this and see how it goes. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's
Mhm.
it's not a good thing. But many times, like
Yeah.
for example, the one I like to throw out is Linkin Park. Their first two albums are like highly praised as some of the best albums of the 2000s. Um, but their fourth album that came out, most people probably couldn't name their fourth album. It was called A Thousand Suns. It was a concept album. I think there were only 9 like full length 3-4 minute tracks on it, but it's a 15-track album. And the first 2 tracks of the album are like less than a minute each, and it's got all of these interludes. They use a way more electronics. They use a lot of samples of speeches throughout. But it was such a different experience from what I was expecting to put on a Linkin Park record, and to me, that was what
Mhm.
was exciting about it. Whereas other people said, "Oh, this doesn't sound like Hybrid Theory. I don't like it anymore." Okay,
Hmm.
go listen to whatever you want to listen to, but I'm glad they made it.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, I just wanted to add something like we've been talking about like the creative process and like forming everything. There was an interview I actually watched with Michael Chapman, who was the director photographer for Taxi Driver, little movie.
Mhm.
Um,
And Raging Bull.
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh,
my
I
favorite.
love the
Yeah.
cinematography in that movie. And I think the interview was from like the mid 2000s. And he was still talking about what he would do differently and how he wanted to shoot those movies. And it's like, it's proof that the creative process never really ends. Like, it could be years after the
Mhm.
fact, and you'll still be thinking, well, I could have done that. I could have done this. Um, but I actually want to ask you, like, Josh, how you were talking about like the ghost of the clapper, is kind of like hovering over your shoulder. Like when I'm writing something, there's a reader over my shoulder looking at what I'm doing. Some quotes I
Mhm.
saw from like Denis Villeneuve and other filmmakers, they're saying like, I make movies for me. Almost sounds like they're cutting the audience out. When you were making this
Mhm.
movie, I'm not sure if this will be a weird question, but when you were making this movie, who were you making it
Yeah,
for
who
in
was
that
in mind?
regard?
Yeah.
I mean, I make movies, and I don't want to make movies because I love to make movies,
Mhm.
but
Well, part of
you
making
know, uh,
movie is an audience, and for the audience to be entertained or to
Exactly.
right.
feel something.
And I was gonna say, I think, I want to have an audience. I want people to watch the film. I
Right.
think of it as like, like a painter or like with a painting. You don't you paint like you want people to look at the painting. You want people to see, what you've
If
done,
if if
Hmm.
you're
and that's the
happy
thing.
with it, usually. There's usually
Mhm.
that
Hmm.
caveat.
Yeah, if you say yeah,
Yeah.
right. Um, I want people to. It's meant to be viewed. It's meant to be seen.
Exactly.
And I feel I don't think I would kind of compromise myself to say, oh, what will an audience like me to do?
Right.
It's still I am still the artist. It's whether or not the audience likes the movie, it's up to them. But I want them to say like, oh, okay, I'm going to go see a Josh Pomponio movie and kind of not necessarily know what the expectations are going to be, but they're going to know that the I'm the creator of the film,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and they're gonna judge it kind of that way. They're going to say like, okay, like I know if I'm going to go see a Josh Pomponio movie, I'm going to see X, Y, and Z. I'm expecting these kind of things. Where you go look at like a painting by like Monet or Renoir or Degas or Picasso, like you're going because you like that style of
Right.
painting. You're
Mhm.
and I kind of think of it like also like the idea of creating film should be that way too. Like if you're gonna if back in the day when they had kind of patrons of the arts, the patron hired one of those guys because they liked their style of work. They
Mhm.
wanted them to make a painting in their style. They didn't hire Renoir and say, oh, I really like your painting, Renoir, but can you paint more like Titian or something? Can you do work
Mhm.
this, can you
How
they didn't try
insulting.
to make him do something right. And I feel like that's kind of what the industry, the studio industry now is, that it's like they're gonna hire a director to make a movie, but they don't want him to make the movie in his style. They want him to make
In a
Yeah.
a
corporate
generic movie.
style.
They want to make something like that. They want a corporate style. And I feel like that's what I hope to be in my and as my career hopefully grows, that I will make a movie. Someone will give me money to make a Josh Pomponio movie, not to just make
Right.
a movie.
Right.
Yeah, and also an audience will go see my movie, not just because it's content to be consumed, but because they want to go and see a film by Josh Pomponio.
Mhm.
Oh, and
Just
that's
like
that's
And so
that's
I think when I was
that's
just
the
like what Brad
goal
said
of
about
any
Linkin Park. It's
creative,
like,
I
sorry.
think.
mhm.
Oh, yeah, go John.
Well, I was
John,
going
go
to say,
ahead.
just like you said, Brad, about Linkin Park, it's like even though their fourth album was something completely different, you still knew it was a Linkin Park album. So it's like
Oh,
there
yeah.
were still some things there that it's like, oh yes, this is Linkin Park, but they were trying something different, just like that.
Mhm.
We'd like to take a brief moment to thank you for listening to Story Weavers. For the enjoyment of our listeners, we want to keep this podcast ad-free and uninterrupted.
If you would like to support us further, check out our options on Patreon. Plus, subscribing will get you behind the scenes content, bloopers, access to Book of the Month polls, and more. We appreciate any and all support.
Now back to the episode. Actually, one of the other things, because you told us your second pick for filmmaker after Wells would be Renoir, Josh. Are there any other filmmakers that you were channeling or thinking about, or that you hold in very high esteem while making Analogic or any of your films? Like here, I wrote down Buñuel, Rene, and I did write down Woody Allen for Midnight in Paris because of a lot of the iconography. What other filmmakers do you kind of have in here?
I mean, I'm a big fan of Truffaut, also Francois Truffaut. I think he's one of my, probably also top five. And I think I don't know if I was channeling, a specific like Truffaut film. I try not to think of specific films when I'm making my own films. I try to think more of like of just like the feeling or the emotion, things like that. And but so definitely like the French New Wave that him and Godard kind of pioneered was a big influence on Analogic. The idea of shooting, with a small lightweight camera on the streets of Paris, with, no permit, run and gun guerrilla style,
Mm-hmm.
like 400 blows or Breathless or something, that, fast kind of editing like Jules and Jim. That's something that was, you know, consciously on my mind of, making the movie. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and Wells, I'm not sure how how linked my film could be to Wells. I think it's a slightly different uh you know uh style
Tone.
than his. I mean, I'm definitely different tone, but technically I try to use wider angle lenses like he used to use, and playing things longer, which him and Renoir really preferred. And I think that's what has made it kind of difficult to get accepted into kind of major festivals, that there is a certain aesthetic that films, whether they're small independent short films or big budget studio blockbusters, there's a certain aesthetic that they all follow with, lighting and lenses and composition and blocking, which kind of mavericks like Wells and Renoir and Truffaut and other people, they don't really follow that classical aesthetic. And I'm kind of, naive enough to think that like, oh, why don't I try that also? Why don't I try to emulate, I like those kind of things, so surely someone else will like it,
Mhm.
and I think that made Analogic a kind of oddball film to be at festivals,
Mhm.
which but it's still the way that I want to make films. It's still the way that's the way, even if I was to take influence of like classical aesthetic away from myself or my favorite filmmakers, but if I was just going to make a film, innocently, I think I would probably still make it in that way, because that seems natural to me.
Mhm.
It's kind of like there's the joke about the guy that goes to the doctor, and he says, I throw up every morning. And the doctor goes, "You throw up every morning? Well, like what? Or no, I fucked it up. The doctor, the guy goes to the doctor, says, I have these really bad headaches, every day. They start in the morning. And the doctor goes, oh, like every morning you have these headaches? And he's like, yeah, like every morning I get these headaches. And the doctor's like, okay, well, tell us your morning routine. And the guy's like, okay, like I get out of bed, I put my, my clothes on, I go to the bathroom, I throw up. And the doctor's like, wait, like you throw up like every morning? And then the guy's like, yeah, doesn't everybody? And because like when you're so used to
Right.
like your routine, when you're
Hmm.
so used to kind of your way of things,
Mhm.
and you find out that that's not the other way of doing things, it's a surprise. And I feel like just like the way that I, like, oh, doesn't everyone like to use wide angle lenses and play scenes in full? Like
Mhm.
it seems more interesting to me. It seems more uh
Mhm.
and I was watching a short film made by a really good friend of mine recently, and really talented person. I loved them to bits. I have worked with them before on other projects too, and I was watching their film, and you know they're as and but they follow that aesthetic, and it looked really good. It's had a bit more success than Analogic had. um but like I didn't feel like I was watching their film. Like if it could have
Right.
been made by you, Brad, or John, or
Hmm.
Mhm.
uh you know Joe Schmo. Like I didn't feel their presence. And I don't think it's, not because they weren't in front of the camera too, but I just felt like, you know, it's okay, and it's okay to follow like the accepted
Hmm.
aesthetic, but you shouldn't follow it to the point that you are now just bland. You are now just part of the content farm
There
or
was
something.
there
Exactly.
was a there was I remember this specifically. It was from one of my college professors. He taught music theory and history, and
They go
so
together.
sort of, but that's not my point. Uh, someone asked him some question, um, and he said, I'll never forget this as long as I live. He said, the reason we learn the rules is so that we can know how to break them. And there's two like schools
Hmm.
of thought when it comes to creativity. Um, and both are valid and have been shown to work, but one is you go in blind and do it. Like again, I'm going to go for the music side of things cuz that's what I know. There are a lot of big albums out there over the years with people who barely knew how to play their instrument. Um, but they knew how to pick up a guitar and they heard sounds that they liked and they were huge successes. But then you also have the train of thought that, or the way of learning and creating that I was kind of taught, which is learn the rules. Like when it comes to classical music, you go back to Baroque and classical music with Mozart and Bach, and you learn like the chord progressions they used, and you can't have parallel fifths and eighths, and you can't have these tones in the same chord, and all of this stuff. And you learn all of that, and then you get to Beethoven, and Beethoven was like the first master of breaking the rules of classical music, and he's
Mhm.
what brought in
Hmm.
romantic music, and especially in classical music because it's a little more highbrow. um but the idea that you learn what the rules are, and same with you guys with filmmaking. Like, you learn what the rules of filmmaking are so that you know when to break them, but you don't just break them because you can. You have a reason for breaking them. There's
Very
a and
much.
and you and but part of it too is, instead of having that that journey of messing around to find something that sounds good or looks good, you kind of know what's going to look good or sound good, and you know how to change it so you know that it's different and unexpected, I guess, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
And Wells called it, in his experience, like the confidence of ignorance, because he liked to tell this story about how when he made Citizen Kane, he didn't really know how to make a movie.
Mhm.
He didn't know that there were he didn't know the rules, so he thought he could do anything that he imagined, and so he asked for things that anyone else would have said are impossible to
Mhm.
do, but he had support that they then tried to make these wild these weird things come true.
Mhm.
So he said that he had that this confidence because he didn't know he was walking along the edge of a
Right.
cliff. He
Yeah.
had the perfect amount of confidence. He didn't know the rules. He didn't know how
Mhm.
to where to fail, because he didn't know that there could be any failure. He just thought if you could do it, the eye can see it. You can do it with the
Yeah.
Yeah.
camera.
And
And then
sometimes that's
the
honestly, as crazy it sounds, sometimes that's the easier way to go, because sometimes when you know the rules, you're sometimes you get stuck in them. Even if
Very
you're trying
much.
to break them, you get stuck in them, and all you're
hmm
focusing on is what you should do or what you're supposed to do or how it's
Mhm.
normally done,
hmm
instead of just being like, screw it, like this makes more sense, and I think this is better and this works better.
Mhm.
Sometimes if you don't know what the rules are, you do it anyways.
I mean, it's like that, at least how I went to film school and such. It's like I can say I came at it from that backwards path. Like, I loved storytelling, I loved films, and it's like my first way of like writing scripts or like writing books was, okay, taking all of these influences and putting them together in the way that worked best, not any established rules. And then when
Mhm.
I went to college to study film and script writing and everything, suddenly, like you said, there were these rules put down. And some of them, I would look at them and say, you don't need to do that. Like, you don't need to follow the 3 act structure directly to the letter. And it's like, I very clearly remember that, like, some professors saying, like, yeah, someone said, like, I don't want to, they didn't compare me to Orson Welles because I am nowhere near like that. But they referred to that, like, the the talent of ignorance or whatever he called it. It's like, you don't know
hmm
that that's wrong, so you're saying, why not do it? It works.
Right.
It's like taking these two disparate pieces and putting them together. I mean, if you look at, because like you were talking about the French New Wave, Josh, there was an American New Wave as well, and it immediately made me think of like William Friedkin with the French Connection, which, I'm sure, as
hmm
we all know, is a very slow paced and methodical and dramatic movie. Um, but like the fast editing, the very spontaneous thing, and like when you said filming without permits, that chase scene filmed without permits and
hmm
everything, it's like you're taking influences from somewhere else and you're saying how this works for this, what I want to do. I'm not doing it because it worked before, if that makes any
hmm
sense.
And it's
Oh
like
yeah.
how can we push it further?
Exactly. How can we,
How can we advance it
right,
more?
taking
Yeah.
something that, like you said, the French masters used for very dramatic purposes, and it's like, hey, this could work as like the American model, the very pumped up, like Mad Max style kind of action, and just adapting it into that. And you can see the influences of it, like between the two, if you look at it from a
hmm
filmmaking perspective.
And I think I think it's also funny because technology has evolved in such a way as to make things easier. Cameras are smaller and lighter weight. It's a lot less expensive now to make a film, whether it's a big film or a small film. Everything has gotten so compact and small that things could be, faster, more intense. You could have, scenes play out for longer minutes, for 10, 15, 20 minutes, because you don't have, change a film reel every 10 minutes.
Hmm.
You could do things in like more natural lighting because digital imaging sensors are sensitive and differently than film, and yet the classical aesthetic structure has remained the same, even though the technology has changed. The ways in which we are using it are still kind of the old
They're
ways,
modeling that,
you
like
know.
the whole 24 frames per second.
It's just
Even
Mhm.
like when
convenient.
the Hobbit movies came out, there was this whole thing. It's like they're being filmed at, I think it was like 48 frames per second at this insane frame
Oh
rate,
yeah, it
Yeah,
was
they
like
only
they
doubled it.
failed
it
Yeah.
because
was
they
like
didn't
the
look
uncanny
like we
valley.
expect.
It was the
Exactly.
uncanny valley
Yeah.
effect.
So it's yeah, just like you said, it's like some things continue to move forward, but then there are other things that you can break, and it's just inherently
Mhm.
knowing which ones you can play around with, which ones you can bend, and which ones no, those are hard and fast. You cannot screw with frame rate, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
or like the 180-degree
I
rule.
Yeah. I had kind of triggered some people in a Wells group on Facebook that I'm in when I posted about how I shared a picture of him shooting Othello with like a really small camera and simple setup, and I was saying like it amazes me that he could do all these things so simply, and I had speculated that he would love modern digital filmmaking because
Oh my
cameras
god,
are
yes.
lighter, smaller.
Mm-hmm.
It would be so easy for him to make a
Yeah.
film, and all these people in the group are probably like older, and they had that kind of well Wells would never shoot on digital because film has the aesthetic and it's a precise thing and blah blah blah, like all, and I'm like, no,
No,
like Wells would like
it was
years
convenience.
before he died.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was convenience. Wells was the experiment with videotape before he died. He was always at the forefront of technology, and even on Kane, he was saying, he asked Greg Tolan, it's like, do we really need all this film? Do we really need this whole big camera? And Tolan was like, no, one day it'll just be like an electric eye. They'll just have a lens, and you'll just point the lens somewhere, and
Yeah.
that'll be it. And
I mean,
you know,
Here
look
we
at
are.
David Fincher's career path is
yeah.
almost the same thing. He started with film, and then as soon as he saw digital, it's like this man who would do 100
Hmm.
takes of something was like, "Oh my god, I could fill up the memory card and just keep going." Like,
Right.
and like you said, Orson Welles or any of those old masters, like Hitchcock, even would probably see that and be like, "Good."
Well, digital storage is
Yeah.
also way less expensive than
Exactly, it's the
analog
Right.
film
film.
cost.
Well,
And
and even just like the storage, like those, you had to put those film reels somewhere, and when you were
mhm,
editing them, they had to
Hmm.
be somewhere. I mean,
right.
just real estate, physical space.
That's why there's so many lost films
Hmm.
now, and it's
Yeah.
like Josh, how you mentioned like Orson Welles, like if you like he wanted to say like, do we need all this film, do we need this, and like the techniques he used. This might be better for the Wells episode actually.
Whatever.
Yeah.
But
we can cut and paste
there
it
was
or
actually
something.
one question I wanted to ask you about Orson Welles too.
Well, ask it.
I am in
We've
a
got
sec,
him
but
here.
I just wanted to say that like him wanting, like people complaining about how, oh well, Welles would never have shot because the aesthetic of film, the grain. You realize that filmmaking was always about advancements of technology. I mean, special effects,
Hmm.
cinematography, color photography,
They wanted to get
infrared,
rid of
or
the grain.
high contrast. It's like
Right.
it's like it's always been about advancing the technology and even subtle things. It's always been about advancement. So this idea of like, no, let's go back. It's like
It's
that's almost
definitely a nostalgia thing.
antithetical to filmmaking.
I know, like my
Hmm.
brother, when he was in college, he got a record player, and he will exclusively buy used records because when he listens to a record, he wants to hear the hiss and the crackle.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, no, when
Hmm.
I want to listen to a record, I want a clean record, but I want that wide dynamic range. I want the quiet things to be quiet and the loud things to be loud, which is something that is mostly lost in the digital age and the radio age.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I find
It's
that
definitely
I always find that funny. I'm like, oh look, I've got like your favorite album here. He's like, yeah, but it's brand new. I don't want to buy that on vinyl. If it's brand new, I can listen to it on my phone.
Okay, I'll go scratch it with my
Okay.
keys for a bit.
Okay, well, get a better stereo system.
It's definitely a weird paradox because, like, recently, my wife and I saw Oppenheimer, and we saw it twice. We saw opening weekend in like digital IMAX, like I think it's like the the biggest IMAX screen, after like the full on film IMAX,
Mhm.
and it was such a powerful film, powerful visual medium, IMAX, and we were blown away by it. And then I think like a month later, we saw a standard 70 millimeter film print of it, and again, same film but different format, and it looked, I mean, the movie was beautiful on IMAX digital, seeing like a 7mm print and seeing kind of the grain and the scratches and the dust and
Mhm.
speckles, it was somehow more beautiful, and I you know I'm more appreciative of
Hmm.
it. So it's weird.
Yeah.
There's still something that's so attractive about film, and if you can see a film, if you can see if a movie was shot on film and then you see it projected on film, I think that is definitely like the way
Yeah.
to go. But like
Hmm.
if you're gonna make a movie and shoot it on film, but then it's gonna premiere on Netflix and
Mhm.
everyone's watching on their smart TVs with UHD upscaling,
As
like,
so and so intended.
why?
That's why it's like
Right.
it's like why
Like, I
I
mean,
hate listening to live albums that don't have crowd noise or have been
mhm,
edited or overdubbed because someone fucked up a solo. Like I hate that.
Hmm.
Like I'm happy when I go to a show and and see something like that, or if
mhm.
I'm listening to a live album, like I want to hear the crowd singing along. If I didn't want
Hmm.
that, I'd go listen to the studio version.
Do you know the whole story about how they shot and edited, Dune, the first of the newer
John might,
Dune, the
but I
new
do
first part
not.
of Dune?
You mean the
No,
Denis Villeneuve
So
Dune?
the new
yeah,
one.
yeah. So they shot it on, digital.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so they started on digital, and then they made a film print of the digital,
I mean, I can
of the
see
digital movie.
why for environmental
They they they
reasons. I
they ran
can
it.
see
They ran
because
it
the
No,
through.
no,
film of the
it
desert.
doesn't end there.
Oh boy.
Okay, so they shot on digital, they make a film print of it, and then they scanned the film print to edit, and
Edit it digitally.
they edited the digital movie from a scan of a film.
I
Yeah,
Well,
want to say I know the
and
movie is called Dune, but I think they took it a bit too literally. Like,
yeah, um,
well, it's like
and
I
it's like
mean,
I mean, and I remember,
there are a lot of
yeah,
audio
it's just
presets that
crazy.
people will run their audio through to make it sound quote more analog uh, than
Hmm.
digital.
right.
And
I can
a
understand.
lot of it, I think, is it's a nostalgia thing. It's a
That's
comfort
one thing,
thing.
like how we were talking about how like newer generations are looking at nostalgia or criticizing it or whatever. And yet they want to go back to like the 80s aesthetics that they haven't even been part
Hmm.
of. And I just find that interesting. It's like things that
It's
they
a different
like Orson Welles
experience.
and filmmakers then wanted to get out of, and then we got out of it.
Hmm.
Now we want to go back to it. And it's like in a way I almost wonder why.
It's just a different experience. It's like this is what we've always known,
Always
but wait,
done. But I
there
also
was a
think it's
different way that things were done. So like I'm curious about that.
it has to do a little bit, I think, with the ingenuity of it too. Like how we were talking about, like, oh, Wells would never have shot on film on digital because it's too easy. I remember
Hmm.
a story about the original King Kong, which I saw when I was like 10, and that was like, oh my god, it was a cool movie to
Hmm.
see because for the time it was ingenuitive. But one of the things, if you look, you don't even have to look hard, you can see where the thumbs of the animators made indents in the fur of all the animals. And it's like it's a huge gaff, but you don't really care because the movie's so fun.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
still animators who still do claymation by hand or any animation by hand, they do that on purpose now as
Yeah.
an homage to that movie, but also to show this was done by hand. Here is my
Yeah.
literal fingerprint on the movie.
Mm.
And it's
Yeah.
like, in a way, you have to
We didn't put
admire that, but
new lightsabers and blaster colors in digitally
Right.
afterwards.
yeah, or digitized Jabba the
And
Hutt.
Ugh.
I'm kind of guilty of that myself with Analogic. The
Mhm.
movie was shot on digital. Yeah, it's black and white. And that's a total aesthetic
Oh, but
choice. It's totally meant
it's so
to
good because
evoke
Mhm.
oh, I love it.
oldness
Well,
and
I was going to ask
yeah.
what was the visual
yeah.
inspiration, and also this is random because I don't think it was very feasible. Did you ever consider shooting it on film, like even just momentarily, like gee?
Wishful
No,
thinking.
I was
Okay,
too wishful thinking to be on film.
okay,
Yeah, but it'd be cool. I mean, I've been thinking shooting my next project on film, and we were kind of running the numbers and stuff, and just like, no,
It's
no,
just too much of a pain in the ass.
it's not
yeah,
feasible.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
I
Yeah,
don't want to
and I was trying to
carry all that
justify it by
crap
saying like,
around.
oh, it'll help, blah blah blah, the narrative. Like, nah, it's like not. But I mean, visually for Analogic, I mean, definitely like Truffaut and the New Wave, that kind of guerrilla style on the streets in black and
Mhm.
white,
Well,
and
and black and white has always been
Wells
kind
with
of
the
like
wide angle.
a it's associated with like the romantic. I think that,
Hmm.
I at least for me
Hmm.
watching it, I think, it's got that kind of softer romanticized feel to it
It's an
because it's
actor's best
black and
friend
white. Yeah.
too.
Mhm.
because black and white, it makes you focus on the faces and the
Mm-hmm.
emotions rather than, oh, how beautiful the costume is. I think it was Orson Welles who said that, or some famous
Yeah.
filmmaker. And it's like, I can see it, because even me, I long for a story or like a script that I write or come across that I could shoot, that I could justify shooting in black and white, because there's just something about it.
Mhm. I also think, and I've shot other projects in black and white, like in
Mhm.
college and stuff, and it was always digital that we then put in black and white. But it was always because, and again, I started way before digital mirrorless and digital cinema. Kind of, I was shooting on DV tapes, but
I
and
remember those days.
transferring them with
Yeah.
FireWire onto
Oh
my
my God,
computer.
Firewire
Um,
RIP.
yeah, FireWire cables,
Ugh.
yeah. And digital video, the mini DV cassettes, they look like video. They never really look
Mm-hmm.
cinematic. And one of the ways that I thought they could was if you took all the color out. And I think even today, like even if you're shooting on, we shot like on a small little Fuji camera, great little camera, but I think unless you're shooting on like a high end, like a Red or like an Arriflex, a digital cinema camera, you know, films still look like digital. They don't quite have that cinematic look if you're shooting on kind of the lower end of the prosumer level of cameras. And I think, as much as I love the camera that I used, I think it still looked, it still looked kind of digital. And I just thought, black and white will kind of enhance it. It'll
Mhm.
take away from
Mm-hmm.
that sharpness and stuff.
It
And
also just increases,
um
I mean, with the name of the film being called Analogic and,
Logic.
an ode to the
right.
analog, the black and white. I mean, that's how all the original films were, shot and
Hmm.
projected, because that was all the technology could afford at the time. Um, so yeah,
Right.
it definitely it adds that romantic nostalgia effect to it.
Hmm.
And I think that fits with the whole context of the story of wanting to meet someone and not need to know their past to be able to make a
Hmm.
connection with them.
Right.
There's one scene though that looks incredible in color, and that's the river scene
Mhm.
Yeah.
at sunset. Because that just has that golden hour lighting, and that looked incredible and
It
stuff
would have just
in color.
it
But
would have been like cheesy though if that had been like the only
The
yeah,
only one
color
in
scene.
color.
It
right,
would have too on the nose.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. Do you mind if I ask that Wells question really quick before we
Of
wrap up?
course, go
Or
ahead.
okay. So
please, yeah.
so
I would
the
love to rap on Wells.
the one, because you mentioned like Wells obviously was a like massive influence on many filmmakers that came after him up until the current day. And then you mentioned that he was big overseas as well. Many
Hmm.
films, and I mean, F for Fake was, if I remember right, filmed in Paris, and it takes place in Paris. Um, do you think that he inspired filmmakers in Europe as well? And do you think any of them influenced him? Do you think he picked up techniques from them, and what do you think they were?
I think the first part is definitely true. Touch of Evil, which was butchered by the studio, uh, got a very limited release, but it won the top prize at the Brussels World Fair, I think in 1958. And Truffaut and Godard, both saw it and they both loved it. And they at different points they wrote about how that was the film that inspired them to become filmmaker. They wanted to stop being film critics and become filmmakers themselves, and it was because of this heavily compromised version of Touch of Evil that inspired them to do that. And of course, Truffaut was a big influence on Scorsese. Scorsese said how Goodfellas is really inspired by Jules and Jim with the
Hmm.
kind of fastness of the
Mhm.
cutting and the beginning.
Uh,
And you think about all the filmmakers that have been inspired by Truffaut and Godard, and they're influential from Wells. As far as like Wells's contemporary or younger cinema people inspiring him, Wells claimed to not watch a lot of movies because he didn't want to be influenced
Mm.
by other filmmakers. Like he claimed to. I think Oya Kodar said that they only watch like bad movies.
To know
Learn
what
what
Because
not
not
they
to
to do.
do. Yeah.
like as like light entertainment. Yeah. I think Renoir was had a effect on Wells. Renoir had a very similar style, less intense I think as than Wells, but definitely the same, very same intentions. And Wells always told the story about how before making Kane, he watched Stagecoach 40 times by John Ford to learn how to make a movie. And so he always talked about Renoir, Ford, and von Stroheim were kind of
Oh,
his
yes.
Interesting.
big influences. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So I guess that about wraps up this episode of Story Weavers. Josh, thank you for coming on and discussing Orson Welles in the previous episode and your film Analogic here. It was wonderful talking with you, and you had a lot of great things to say, so thank you.
And
Of course. Thank you
we're
for having me.
very
and-
much looking forward to whatever project
Whatever
you
your
have
next
going on
project
next.
is.
And we
like
wanna know
you
about
said,
it.
everything you've learned and everything that you're looking forward to doing, we hope you do it, and we can't wait to see it.
Thank you. I hope to come back and talk about it with you
Oh,
sometime.
please, we would love to have you. Don't just let us know. So yes, and for anyone who does want to check out Josh's film Analogic, we'll be linking it in the description if this is on YouTube, or just check the description on whatever platform you're watching it in. It'll be linked there. And thank you for listening to Story Weavers. Thank you for listening to this episode of Story Weavers. As ever, we're incredibly grateful to all of our listeners and contributors. Come back next week for the next installment of Story Weavers.